Hi. Last week, all about nouns. This week, a much shorter lesson, but an important one, adjectives. The key is that in Latin, adjectives and nouns must have the same endings. Now that doesn't mean that the endings will necessarily be spelt the same, although they might be. What it means is that the endings must agree in all three categories of number, gender, or case. Let me explain. Every noun has a number. That is, it's either singular or plural. Every noun has a gender. That is, it is masculine or feminine or neuter. And every noun has a case. That is, nominative, vocative, accusative, genitive, dative, or ablative. So for any noun in any Latin sentence, you should be able to tell not only its vocabulary meaning, an English equivalent, but also whether it is nominative, feminine, plural, or ablative, masculine, singular, or any combination of number, gender, and case. Singular or plural, masculine, feminine, or neuter, nominative, vocative, accusative, genitive, dative, or ablative. If you look at the endings, you'll know whether the ending is accusative, or genitive, or ablative, or dative, whether it is singular or plural. And when you look the noun up in the back of the book, it will tell you whether it is masculine, feminine, or neuter. Now, adjectives must have the same endings as the nouns. That is, they must agree in number, gender, and case. Now, that might mean that the endings are spelt the same. For example, a good girl would be puella bona. The same endings, because they're spelt the same, right? Well, no, they are spelt the same. The endings are both A, but that is purely coincidence. It just so happens that the nominative feminine singular of girl ends in A, and the nominative feminine singular of the word for good ends in A, puella bona. But for example, if you had a good king, the word for king is rex. And the word for good, if it's masculine, like a king, would be bonus. So rex, bonus don't have the same ending in the sense that the endings aren't spelt the same, but they do have the same ending in the sense that both of those endings are nominative, masculine, and singular. Here we are on page 77, ready to start exercise 8.5, the first of the two exercises set for this week. But we're not going to start it until we've read what he has to say in his introduction. He reminds us to study the information on the opposite page, which I'm going to do with you in a minute to make sure that gets done properly, about the agreement of adjectives with third declension and common nouns. Remember, adjective agreement has nothing to do with rhyming or with endings being spelt the same. When they're spelt the same or when they rhyme, it's a fluke. He reminds us that in first form we were able to cope with agricola bonus. Those didn't rhyme or they weren't spelt the same, and we coped with that. We knew that those two words went together. So just work out which case and gender, and by the way, number, singular or plural, the noun is, and then put the adjective into that form. Now before we go on, let's study the information on the opposite page. The information on the opposite page is here at the top of page 76. Agreement of adjectives with third declension nouns. Care needs to be taken when making an adjective such as bonus agree with a noun such as rex. Nothing strange happens, but you may feel something strange is happening because the two words stand almost no chance of rhyming or being spelt the same. There's no such word as B-O-N-X. Gone are the happy days of puella bona, dominus bonus, where you simply put the same ending on the adjective as you already had on the noun. You might do that. I mean, the word for a good girl is puella bona, so if you're asked to translate puella, a good girl, then you write puella bona. If you're asked what a Latin for a good master is, then it is dominus bonus. But we're going to be asking more difficult things. Now we're going to start using third declension nouns. Now what he says is we have to put up with rex, bonus. Those words do go together. Rex is masculine, so bonus is the word you need. Even though it isn't spelt the same, it doesn't rhyme. Herbs is a feminine noun, so the word for a good city is herbs bona. And opus, meaning work, is a neuter noun, so opus bonum. Those don't rhyme, they're not spelt the same, but don't panic. Stick to the rules of adjective agreement, look them up, look up the number, gender and case, and make them go together regardless of the spelling, and you will be fine. By the way, he now mentions common nouns. These are nouns that could be either masculine or feminine. When you look them up in the back, it doesn't say M for masculine or F for feminine or N for neuter. It says C, which means common. When making an adjective agree with a common noun, it's normal to assume that the noun is masculine unless there's some good reason to make it feminine. So if, for example, the hero is visiting an island inhabited only by women, then the word for inhabitants in coli will be feminine. However, if he's visiting a city like Rome, the inhabitants include men, and so we would use masculine agreement. At last, we're ready to begin. I don't think I'm going to do number 1 for you this week. I want to look at number 5. The reasons why will become clear in a minute. Read it in English. Think about it before we try to start writing Latin. For the new work, obviously a meaningless phrase in itself, but it's just a grammar exercise, so let's not worry too much about that. What's important is that you don't start looking up the word for. You should recognise this as an exercise in noticing that the new work is in the dative case. We're going to need to know 2 words of vocabulary. We're going to need to know the Latin for new and the Latin for work. We're then going to make them into the dative case, and we're going to make the adjective and the noun agree. Now, the reason I chose number 5 is because it so happens that the word for work is one of those laid out at the back of the book. Here's page 99 again, familiar to you from last week. And the second noun here, opus, happens to be the word for work. I know that because I looked the word work up in the back of the book and it told me opus, operis, N for neuter means work. Or rather, I looked up work and it said opus, operis, neuter. So, we need to know what number, gender and case to write. Well, the gender is looked after for us in the case of nouns. It is neuter, it will always be neuter, it can only be neuter. So we don't worry about that for nouns. We'd remember that it must be neuter, but that's the last we think about that for a moment or two. We still need to know whether we want singular or plural, or nominative, vocative, accusative, genitive, dative, ablative. Now the phrase is for the new work. Well, I've already said that it is dative we're after, and of course it's not works, it's work. So there is the dative singular, there is the word for work, and you will write down the word operi. That means for the work. But wait, we need the adjective. Look up the back of the book and find out the Latin for new. The Latin for new is novus, nova, novum, and it goes like bonus, bona, bonum. By the way, I'm reading across the page there. Bonus, bona, bonum is the Latin for good. Novus, nova, novum is the Latin for new. Now, I don't know if you remember, we're dealing with the phrase for the new work. And work, we decided, was singular. So we're going to be looking at this top block. We also decided it was neuter. So we're going to be looking at this column. And then finally we decided it was going to be dative. And so the neuter, singular, dative, it says bono, but of course that's the word good. We need the word new. So we change bono into novo. And when we come to write the phrase for the new work, we will write operi novo. O-P-E-R-I-N-O-V-O. When you've finished exercise 8.5, scroll down to exercise 8.6. I don't know about you, I always think it's downhill once we get to the Latin into English. I think that's why he puts the English into Latin first. It's harder, gets us thinking, and then Latin into English, much easier. Doesn't mean there aren't traps. Before we even get as far as looking a word up in the back, we suddenly see that there's something funny going on here. And of course this is to do with the fact that you think you know in, but do you remember in Latin has different meanings depending on whether it's followed by the accusative or the ablative. So let me just draw that to your attention at this stage. We can regard the endings as correct. Flumen altum is right and flumine alto is right. We don't have to worry about looking things up and making them agree. He's done that for us. But we have to know what the difference is between in flumen altum in one case and in flumine alto in another case. So we'll still have to keep looking up the back of the book to know which one's accusative and which one's ablative and what is the difference between them. And as for the rest, their cases tend to be defined by these prepositions. So post, for example, takes the accusative, whereas sine, meaning without, takes the ablative. But of course you don't need to say, all you write for sine nomine is without a name. You don't have to say without, by, with, or from a name. De means down from. Prope means near. Cum means with. Cum also takes the ablative. Rege is ablative and malo is ablative. But you don't write with the bad king. You simply write with the bad king. I think I've probably said enough. I've given enough away. Over to you.